Hello and welcome to the 19th installment of Aaron Walker Art Talk. I am still Aaron Walker and I am still joined by Nate Baker. Nate, how are you?
Doing well.
Awesome. And today we are covering my illustration entitled Bored. Nate, why did you pick this?
I picked it because while the theme seems very clear because of the colors, it's not very saturated. It's very grayscale. The expression on the face is almost not bored. It seems like it's halfway between bored. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's looking at something. So at least that was my perception of it. I also like the just the style of it. I don't even know what you'd call that necessarily. And some of the detail on the lines, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what he's wearing. So like there's the shirt, but around the collars was kind of interesting. But mostly it seemed like there was a little bit of contrast between like him being bored, but him also seeming to have his interest piqued because one eye is raised there. So maybe I'm picking up on something that isn't there, but I just kind of thought it was interesting for sure.
Well, okay. So this is a picture of a picture. So I saw this. It was already an illustration on the cover of some like manual or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I tried to like draw it in my own style, which, by the way, I would call this a caricature, right?
Okay. Right. Well, caricature, but yeah.
But what particular kind of caricature?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any subcategories there.
I don't know either, to be honest with you. But yeah, muted tones. It looks grayscale, but it's really blue.
Yeah, I see the blue there to get more of that kind of bored, depressed tone.
So here's the weird thing for me, which is like, this is just a picture of a dude that's bored, right? There isn't really any deeper meaning. It's like just, I saw this and I made it. This is like one of my best-selling prints, right?
Really? Well, why do you think that is?
Well, that's my question, is I don't know. And so I think part of it is because it's straightforward, simple, relatable. Like people don't have to like overthink it. It's just right. Like, I
can see it. I can see it fitting in a bunch of different contexts. I don't know what you just typically sell this as a print. I mean, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. And that's what I was trying to say earlier. It reminds me of another kind of art form. Like, yeah, it's a caricature, but something about the style reminds me of something that I've seen in an Italian restaurant that I went to that has a similar kind of style thing of all things. So I just kind of thought it was interesting. It kind of reminded me of that in my own little memory.
I mean, look, I used to do like, I used to be involved in like graffiti, like that sort of thing. So it was all about like fast movement, fast lines, drawing characters in quick motions that you can do quickly, even if it's just on paper that you can do very quickly. And so that kind of motion gets transferred into the aesthetic of, the character.
Maybe that's what it is, because it kind of reminds me of like concept art that I see a lot where people are doing this quick drafting of different things. But that has its own kind of unique stylistic element to it that can sometimes be preferred. It reminds me of actually what my brother was a very talented drawer when he was younger. And sometimes he would just spend a ridiculous amount of time on something he just started sketching, but ended up being like really solid. And I could never replicate that. So I guess it's a variety of memories that this just kind of struck a chord with it, which is why I picked it. And I just thought his expression was interesting because it's not just blank, right? Mm. There's still something to it that indicates that he's bored without just being blank and it's bored, not depressed.
Right.
I think that's interesting because I think if I was going to try to draw something bored, I would probably draw someone depressed.
Right. Let's see. Do you have any more questions on this? And if not, I guess I have a question.
No, I mean, my only comment is maybe the reason it's one of your best-selling prints is because it's so relatable and it hits on people's memories in a certain way. But it's interesting to know that that's one of your best sellers.
Well, all right. I'm trying to think because I thought that maybe you'd like be able to relate this to your work either with like SFL or just with your like business partner of like the more simple and accessible things are, like that is what people go for. It's not necessarily, I don't want to say like, oh, you put no effort into something and then it's just fine, but like accessibility as a thing that consumers want.
Yeah. And I also think, this goes to show what's valuable and what takes a long time are not always the same thing. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming this is not, while this is one of your best-selling pieces, it's not the one that you put the most time into. Like you said, you took something, you replicated it. But that shows that, people conflate all the time hard work with what they're owed, when in reality, this is valuable feedback as to what kind of things can I extrapolate from this that I can incorporate in my future artwork to create something that resonates with more people. And it might not require the most tedious, painstaking hours to make your next piece. You could end up drawing something like this in however long this took and having far more success. So I think that's an interesting lesson to learn, even particularly as an artist, when that's a challenge across the board. So
I think it's definitely like a challenge, particularly for artists, because artists have a tendency to not only be like neurotic, but to be like not self-absorbed, but like engrossed in the work. And so it's like, well, I would say that like you can become like delusional, which I've talked about in a previous episode with Austin Batchelor, where you're talking about these artists who are like, well, I put all this effort into this and I'm charging like $1 million for it, and I don't understand why it's not selling. So like that's one thing that you could derive from it. It's like, okay, whatever you think it's worth isn't what it's necessarily worth.
Right.
But then I think of, I don't know if you know David Cho, but he's like a famous artist who went from like street art to fine art. And he talks about doing these very intricate paintings of like landscapes, like cityscapes, right? And he was like just putting the price down for like nothing. He's selling his work for absolutely nothing and no one would buy it. And he's like, I got to a certain point where I was like, all right, fuck you guys. I'm charging like $5,000 for it now. You can't afford my work. And that's obviously been like, it's led to his success. So I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, well, there's also perceived value, right? So I think the lesson here is it's not really about the dollar amount. It's what people are willing to pay for. So, which it sounds like I just repeated myself, but like you could price this thing higher and it might still be your best seller because it's resonating with people more. But there is a lot of the idea that when things are priced higher, people's perception of them being more valuable is higher, right? Diamonds didn't really used to be the standard, jewelry, but De Beers came along with some marketing campaigns and now it's, super expensive for a little rock that shines a little bit. So, I mean, there's definitely a component of that. And another thing that I notice with artists, particularly when they're young and they're trying to turn it into a career, is like Hannah Phillips is a practice participant who, I'll see some of her works and I'll be like, wow, but she sees all these little flaws and she's like, well, this one's not really my great one. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's one of my favorite ones that I've seen, so I just think that's inherent in a lot of artists. And I think it's useful to take note of what people are enjoying or not. And regardless of the effort that it takes, I think a lot of times people get very purist with it.
Well, for sure. Nate, thank you so much for coming on. I'll see you next time.
Right. All right.